funny.
Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Mayhem. It's your boy Chris. Missed you guys last week. Sorry for taking that week off. It wasn't planned initially, but had a lot of stuff going on in the filmmaking world. As I've said before, I do filmmaking, and we've had a lot of promising things happening lately. Some things that we're waiting to find out about. So, you know, a lot of stuff going on there. And honestly, I was getting a show together, but I didn't really have enough time to invest into it to really have enough information to provide for you guys. As you know, anytime I do a show, I always make sure to include all my links, so that way you can read it and go back and check behind me. And I do, you know, some thorough reading. I'm not the most thorough necessarily, but I do try to look up enough stuff to be, you know, fairly knowledgeable about what I'm sharing with you guys. And I really didn't feel like I had enough time and had enough gathered up for last week to do that for you guys. So I would rather just not do a show than to do a show and kind of half-ass it and just kind of throw some stuff and hope it sticks. It's not what I want to do. The whole idea of the show is to give a different perspective of the news that's out there, maybe talk about news that's not in mainstream media. That's one of the big things, obviously, but speak to it from a different perspective, like so many other independent content creators on online. So, you know, I always try to promote those guys. I always suggest that you go out and seek them out and look for the left, the right, the middle, and you know, anywhere in between, any of those, because the independent content creators that do take the time to look up stories and facts and gather, you know, points and counterpoints and everything like that together are typically going to be more trustworthy and more knowledgeable than the mainstream media that reads off a script that's provided to them probably by, you know, financially backed, supportive, invested, I don't know, conglomerates, corporations, whatever. So those may be a little tainted in the way those come across. But speaking of filmmaking, I did want to say that I'm actually getting out of town this weekend. We'll be going to the Blue Ridge Mountains here in Georgia to the Blue Ridge Film Festival. My latest short film. It's a horror film called What the Devil Said. It got into the festival up there, and me and the wifey, we're going to go up there and have a little weekend. Our anniversary just passed. We're going to go celebrate our anniversary, go check out my film, check out some other films that are up there. And if you're interested in checking out my film, you don't have to go to the Blue Ridge Mountains, I promise. They are doing a virtual portion of the festival, which is going to be really, really cool. It is this weekend only, and I believe to watch either my film or my block of films, however it works out, I think it's only $4.99. They probably tack on some kind of extra, you know, convenience fee or something like that. But I'll make sure the description or the link is in the description below. So if you want to go check it out, you can check it out. And I believe it's unlimited viewing all weekend. So once you purchase it the one time, you can watch it as much as you want. But yeah, that's a way you can check that out if you're interested at all. But anyways, glad you guys are back. Let's jump into some of the news. Obviously, we got one of the bigger news stories that's out there right now is the Russian-Ukraine story, and we'll get to that in a little bit. So anyway, so we know about the Russian-Ukraine deal. We'll get into that in a minute. So kind of first want to see what the current state of Biden is like. And like I said, all the links are going to be in the description, as always. Check it out, read behind me, make sure you see what I see. If you see something different, awesome. If you feel like I'm doing a terrible job, hey, you know, throw it in the comments, let a brother know. But this is from CNN. It says Biden moves closer toward announcing Supreme Court nominee. Several signals suggest President Joe Biden is moving closer to picking someone to replace Justice Stephen Breyer on the Supreme Court as White House quickly approaches its self-imposed deadline to announce a nominee before the end of the month. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki told reporters on Wednesday there was no circumstance in which Biden would hold his announcement of a Supreme Court nominee after February, suggesting the ongoing crisis in Ukraine hasn't derailed their goal. Multiple sources have told CNN Biden that has already met. Even the pros messed up. So y'all don't be tripping when I do. That ain't good grammar right there. I said that ain't. Okay, so blah, 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 blah He's already met with 3 potential Supreme Court nominees, each of whom could become the first black woman nominated to the bench. The women under consideration are these people here. All right. And you can continue to go on and read there. Again, we've said this before, and this has come up. This is true in acting. This is true in politics. It's true in whatever. You know, a lot of times we're trying to hit those first woman for this, first black woman for this, the first trans person for this, the first gay person for this, like Pete Buttigieg. You know, I think that's great that he's in the cabinet, but I don't think he's doing anything in the cabinet. In fact, I don't think he was brought into the cabinet to do anything except for to hit that first openly gay cabinet member of that department, whatever. And it's just to check a box. I don't think he's really doing much of anything, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I would say that our roads can prove that that's not our failing infrastructure. How about that? Can prove that he's not really doing a whole lot. Again, you can continue reading this. I just hate the idea that we're going to put someone on the Supreme Court because of the color of their skin. That almost seems racist to me when you think about what racism is, or sexism, that it's going to be a female. But I do understand at the same time, like, hey, we want representation. We want to hear a different perspective, just like you listening to me instead of CNN or whoever. So I get that too. The fear of it, though, is that we're selecting someone who doesn't deserve that role, someone who's not qualified for that role, much like Kamala Harris isn't qualified to be the vice president. Sorry if you love her. I can't stand that woman. She shouldn't be there, but she's there because she checked all the right boxes. That said, I hope, and I pray we don't do that with the Supreme Court, because it is a significantly longer term that is served there. If it is a woman of color, a black woman, or whatever, I hope it's someone who can get the job done. Now, of course, if Biden picks her, she's going to be more liberal or progressive or whatever, you know, left leaning, and that's fine. Because it has a little left, a little right, and ultimately, hopefully, it balances out, because a lot of these folks have voted surprisingly to lean different ways because of how they interpret the Constitution. And ultimately, that's what we're going for, is people to actually interpret based off of the Constitution what is legal, what isn't, and so on and so forth. So I'm just hoping he picks somebody who's right for the job. I don't care the color of skin or what they got between their legs at all. I don't care who they want to hook up with, if they're gay, transgender, whatever. The point is, if they're right for the job, let's do it. If not, then they don't need to be there, no matter how many boxes they check. Moving on to another story. From USA Today, DOJ ending Trump era China initiative, national security program fueled Asian intolerance biases. So I brought this up for a couple of reasons. Just it's something else that the Biden admin is doing. It has to do with Trump, of course. We're going to see later on in the show, when we do talk about Ukraine and Russia, kind of how they're undoing some things that Trump did. They probably should be leaving alone, or should have left alone. I'm not the absolute biggest Trump supporter, but it's really interesting to see them undoing a lot of what Trump did, and those specific things coming back and biting them in the butt. And unfortunately, they're coming back and biting us in the butt as well. But we'll go ahead and read this just to see what it's about. It says the Justice Department is ending a Trump-era national security program known as the China Initiative, saying the effort aimed at countering the persistent economic espionage threat fostered anti-Asian bias and discouraged U.S. efforts to attract top scientists for critical research across business and academia. Assistant Attorney General Matthew Olson, Chief of Justice's National Security Division, announced a move Wednesday, acknowledging long-standing concerns voiced by civil rights advocates that the program's identity had fueled a narrative of intolerance and bias. To many, the narrative suggests that the Justice Department treats people from China or Chinese descent differently, Olson said. The rise in anti-Asian hate crime and hate incidents only heightens these concerns. And it goes on more, and it talks about someone who could be looking into different things for Trump, and she's Asian and stuff. You know, that's great. And you know, when Trump put like the travel bans out there, they called him racist and xenophobic and all kinds of stuff at the beginning of the coronavirus, before we were all freaking out. And then Biden didn't, nobody said anything. And then in hindsight, they're thinking, okay, well, maybe Trump did the right thing, but they won't give him the credit for it. Again, not the biggest Trump fan, but I can acknowledge right from wrong. Okay. I can acknowledge hypocrisy. So I don't know that much about this particular program, to be 100% transparent with you. It does talk a little bit more about it, but of course it does have its own slant on it. And kind of doing a little search, I probably could have done more searching and found more about it. But in the searching I did, I didn't really find anything that stood out to me as definitive. But I would imagine that this was put in place intentionally to serve a specific purpose, and it was probably not meant to be a long-term thing anyway, and was probably for a, like I said, for a specific purpose. Especially knowing now, I think YouTube won't take me down for this, that it's significantly likely that COVID-19 came from the lab in Wuhan. I know it was a conspiracy theory at first, but now all roads are kind of leading that way. And that is, of course, in China, as Trump would say. And they gave him a hard time for that, too. So, not trusting Chinese doctors and scientists may have made sense at one time. And maybe we're getting away from that. But anyways, this is just an example of something they're overturning. Again, kind of tuck that away at the back of your mind, because we're going to come back to some more things that they've overturned and things that have changed since Biden's taken office over from Trump. Here's another one from NBC News. Officials considering reinstalling fence around Capitol for State of the Union. The fence is the same barrier that remained around the Capitol for months. Excuse me. After the January 6th riot and during the Justice for J6 rally. Security officials are considering reinstalling a fence around the Capitol building ahead of possible protests that could coincide with President Joe Biden's State of the Union address. Why? They didn't do this for anyone else. Why all of a sudden are they doing this? And I know someone in the comments is going to say, well, they did do it this one time for someone, and that's fine. But these fences are going up a lot. And for an administration and a political party that really is against fences and walls, it's really amazing to see that, number one. Number two, usually authoritarians put up fences to keep the people out. It's amazing to me to see, and we'll get to Canada in a minute, the people rising up and speaking out and protesting. It's interesting that the administrations will listen to some and not others. And one side you have like peaceful protesters doing, I don't know, like the trucker convoy, for example, or, peaceful rallies. They don't want to listen to them. They want to make laws and everything and get rid of them. But you got other parties that are, or groups that are burning down cities, killing folks, robbing stores, completely just destroying towns, taking over towns, turning into occupations. And the administration party supports them, bails them out of jail, does all kinds of stuff. It's amazing to me how that happens, and the open hypocrisy that's there. And how many Americans just go along with it. It just really blows my mind on that. But yeah, dictators usually have the fences up all the time, not an open democracy or a democratic republic, which is what we are. But the temporary inter-perimeter fence is part of those ongoing discussions and remains an option. However, at this time, no decision has been made, a Capitol Police spokesperson said, adding that the agency has been working closely with the Secret Service to plan for the State of the Union scheduled for March 1st. I can't wait to hear that. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin has approved requests for the deployment of hundreds of National Guard troops to help police with traffic during First Amendment demonstrations expected in the coming days, the agency said Tuesday. And again, when Trump was elected and they had all those demonstrations with people yelling and screaming and whatever, I don't really think they were on high alert there. And they didn't make a big deal out of it there. It's just whatever they can do, I think, to shed certain people of political parties or that voted for certain people in a negative light, they're going to do it. And I yawned a minute ago. Let me explain. I'm a big boy, and I've started taking CrossFit, and I'm just getting started, and it is whooping me. So if I seem a little out of it, a little tired, it is not something I'm used to. Okay. The only gym I'm familiar with is gym from The Office. So this is something new to me. So I apologize for that ahead of time. After the fact, I guess it's already on, but yeah, it's just, it's interesting to read this and to see how they react one way or the other, depending on what side of the aisle they fall on. And this is a side note. It does have to do with this, but at the same time, it has nothing to do with this, if that makes sense. But I think most people, when they think about politicians, the job is, at least in this country, we elect someone to represent us, whether it's our senator or congressperson or local, at our local communities, local councils, school boards, whatever. We're electing people to represent our voices, right? In a Democratic Republic, that's what we do. What is infuriating is that that very seldom, once the people get into office, very seldom do they listen to their constituents. Mostly they listen to the people with the money, right? And we talked about this before too. Their backers, the whatever you want to call them, just big money folks, whoever can pad their wallet the most and give them the best opportunities long term. And then they will literally fight tooth and nail for a position in an office that I can't imagine is all that fun to have. As much work as they should be doing, right? For 4 years, 8 years, whatever. But they will fight tooth and nail for that office. And then you got people like, I think Pelosi says she's going to run again. My God, that woman's she's been there since before I was born. Biden has been since before. I mean, so many of them have been in there for so long. They treat it like a job, which I disagree with. It's like a job where they just clock in and clock out, and they sell their soul to the highest bidder. And then every time, because we are stupid and we have short-term memory, every time it's election season, we conveniently forget all the negative and only look at what they've done over the last 6 months to a year, which is when they start lowering prices on gas, by executive order or whatever it is they do, tapping into overage supplies or whatever. When they start, putting out different laws, when they lighten up on mask mandates, when they start picking up trash twice a week or whatever it is they do to get your vote. You remember that, you vote them in, and then they go back to the same old ways for the next 2, 4, 6, whatever years. And then we have another election and it's the same thing over and over again. Or we just don't go out and vote at all. And these people just stay in office forever. It's got to stop. It's got to go. And I hope that you will join me in going to the polls and getting these people out of office and trying to get some people in there that want to serve the people instead of serve themselves. I know that's few and far between, but there's people out there. We can do it. Moving on to convoy. So we got a little update. The other day, this article is from AP News about Trudeau revoking the emergency powers, but the emergency powers were allowing them to, everything from fining, arresting, taking your animal if you had an animal. If you didn't claim the animal after so many days, they would euthanize the animal, the dog, little puppies, little kittens, whatever. Freezing bank accounts. They already, through their government, shut down fundraising efforts. Then they went after the actual bank establishments themselves, anyone who was donating, anyone who was participating, whatever. And then we'll get into an article in a minute from the Ottawa Chief Police saying that, hey, even after you guys go home, if we have a record that you were participating in these protests, we're still going to come after you and still get you. So, I don't see any reason why you should even stop. But I guess the pushback was a little bit too much. So Trudeau revoked his emergency powers, and we'll read this for a minute. But it says, after the Canada blockades end, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced Wednesday he is removing emergency powers police can use after authorities ended the blockades at the borders and the occupation of Ottawa by truckers and others opposed to COVID-19 restrictions. Trudeau said the threat continues, but the acute emergency that included entrenched occupations has ended. His government invoked the powers last week, and lawmakers affirmed the powers late Monday, which is another alarming thing. Not only did this dude say, hey, we're going to kill your dogs and we're going to freeze your bank accounts, but he was supported by he was supported by lawmakers and whatever their system looks like. I'm sorry, I'm kind of fading out here. Because I was watching the next article we'll get into talks about the Ottawa chief of police I was talking about, and it was a live conference, and it's just mind blowing to me to see the stark differences of people. So in like the chat in this live video, they had the chat going, right? And so you had people that were like, this guy's a tyrant. We got to get rid of him. Got to get him out of the office. He's the worst, whatever. And going after them, right? Saying this is treasonous. This is this and that. And you have people over here saying, Trudeau's the best we've ever had. He keeps winning. He's going to win this. He's going to win another election. We love him. And it's just, are people not seeing the same things, or hello? Are they seeing the same things, but because of the thing that I talk about a lot is the perspective from which they see things, are getting different things out of it. And traditionally speaking, statistically, and Tim Pool has spoken about this several times, so I give him a lot of the credit for this, because he is Mr. Thorough in researching stuff, him and his team. And one of the things he was saying is that conservatives, Republicans, whatever, if you're mostly on the right or center right, you tend to get news from and look at things from the perspective of both sides, including watching CNN, MSNBC, whatever. Whereas people on the left tend to only get the news from people on the left, from sources that are very left leaning, which gives them this echo tunnel here that just, echo chamber rather, that all they see is the same ideology they have. They're never really introduced to any opposing ideology. They don't sit down and talk to somebody who has opposing ideology, and it never gives them the opportunity to really open their mind. Whereas the right or moderate on either party really tend to go on both sides and hear it from different points of view, and that really empowers them. So it's unfortunate that the larger majority of this country, I can say, which is Democrats, is the larger voting bloc, are less open-minded, even though they tend to promote open-mindedness. So I'm hoping that changes over time. I'm just really disappointed that our mainstream media continues to lean both in news and entertainment to the left so heavily that they are really pushing an entire, portion of their audience away. Where, like comedians and show hosts like Bill Maher, for example, has finally, and I wish I would have pulled something up on him now that I think about it, but Bill Maher is finally kind of seeing the error of his ways and standing back and seeing the left just drift or shoot further and further to the left as he stands by, and he doesn't even recognize the party anymore. So he's just one example, of course, but even people like Joe Rogan, that we'll talk about again a little bit, who is kind of a center left dude, is really standing back and just blown away about how far the left is going. But the left never looks to the right, never really, and some people do. And I applaud you if you do. I'm not here to criticize you. I am criticizing the population as a large. And on both sides, very seldom do we sit down and have meaningful conversations between two opposing sides. I got a good buddy of mine, and he watches the show, so thank you, Dustin. But he and I actually agree on quite a few things politically, even though I think we come from different sides of the spectrum there, and we disagree on some things. We always have meaningful conversations. I don't think there's ever been a time that either one of us have walked away angry with each other. I'm a Christian. He is not. And even in just talking about general topics, because I try not to dive too deep into that with him, we treat each other with respect. We walk away still respecting each other, thinking about what the other person said. And like I say, that's true for religion, politics, or other worldviews. And even though he may not change my mind, or I may not change his mind, it does give us that different perspective from which to see things. And honestly, I just think that makes people significantly better. Their minds are open, and I'm willing to be wrong. And so is he. And that's what makes our conversation so enjoyable, is that when you go into a conversation knowing you're right, and unwilling to change your mind, there's no point in the conversation. You're just there to give a lecture and you're just listening for your turn to talk. But when you're listening with an open mind, receiving what's being said to you and then adding to the conversation, and it is a two-way street, man, that is really when we grow. I know I just chased a big old rabbit hole here from Trudeau, but I just had, we've got to try to find ways to get on the same page or to find those compromises. Because right now everyone is going so far left or so far right that no one is wanting to meet in the middle. And the ones that are, the small, I think is a good portion actually, but we'll call it a small minority of folks that are trying to meet in the middle are, disowned and ridiculed by both the left and the right for being traitors or whatnot, because they are trying to find that middle ground, that compromise. So it's incredibly silly to me, but I digress. We'll continue on. Here's the other article I was talking about. It says Ottawa's police chief says criminal investigations into Freedom Convoy will continue for months. So, and I did try to find the little video clip that I was talking about. It was part of a longer interview, so I didn't grab it out of there. I didn't see it, but I did see it on several other against guys. I'm sorry for the yawning. That CrossFit will do a number on you. But I know I did see it on Louder with Crowder, and I want to say I saw it on again Tim Pool probably, or one of Tim Pool's 300 channels he's got. But it was on, what were both of those? I know I saw it on Louder with Crowder, where they talked about it and showed the clip. But he's asked, like, what about, the people that have already packed up and left? He goes, oh no, they already broke the law. I'm going after them still. So it's interesting to see that they have thrown everything they could after these protesters. What do they try to call them? I think they call them occupiers or something like that. Anyways, we'll look into it. He's not even the voted in police chief, because the elected police chief left during all this. This is the interim police chief. It says Ottawa's interim police chief says the investigation into a 3-week occupation of downtown Ottawa will continue for months to come. On Saturday, police cleared Wellington Street in front of Parliament Hill of protesters for the first time since the demonstration began on January 28th. As officers began moving into the downtown core on Friday, several vehicles left Wellington Street, Kent Street, and other streets in the area. However, Interim Chief Steve Bell says the investigation will not end when the demonstrators leave the streets of Ottawa. If you are involved in the protest, we will actively look to identify you and follow up with financial sanctions and criminal charges. This investigation will go on for months to come. It has many, many different streams, both from a federal financial level, from a provincial licensing level, from a criminal code level, from a municipal breach of court order, breach of court injunction level. Former Police Chief Peter Slawley said at the start of the demonstration that police would be gathering intelligence on protesters and pursuing charges if necessary. In addition, yada yada, were seen with video recorders around the chateau on Friday. So yeah, they're going through extremes to identify these people and take them out. And I know this is Canada, not America, but I can see this happening here, which, boom, we're going to get into that in just a second. But here, I can see them going to just as much extremes to identify peaceful protesters that are standing up for, the right to choose whether they get vaccinated or not. Again, these people aren't protesting the vaccine. They're protesting the vaccine mandates because they want to have the right to choose. My body, my choice, right? That saying is okay for some, but not for others. So that's interesting to see there again, hypocrisy, right? So I see them going through the same efforts here in the U.S., but they won't go through the same efforts for, like I said, people actually literally burning down buildings, killing people, destroying entire towns and the livelihoods of the people that live in those towns and in the communities. So they kind of have a hands-off approach on that. People say, hey, we're taking over this area and it's going to be Chad or Chaz or Chop or whatever. And they're like, okay, well, y'all just stay in there and do your thing. Whatever, man. There's just so much stupidity right now. And we'll get to Ukraine and Russia in a minute, because those guys, we got some of them building military of some of the most hardcore individuals that walk the earth, and then we're, you know, with several other large countries building a military full of all kinds of diversity and inclusion and everything like that, because we want to make sure that that's what we're all about in our military. Doesn't make any sense. So from Fox News, Pennsylvania truck convoy close to D.C. We're the tip of the arrow right now, organizer says. The first of multiple trucker convoys slated to arrive in Washington, D.C. in the coming days depart from Pennsylvania this week, and we're a few miles outside the Capitol Wednesday, one of the organizers told Fox News. I'm sorry. Can you guys see this? Oh, it went away. There it is. Hunter Biden's disgusting laptop computer repairman reveals what made him call FBI. I just call that out because you gotta love the reminders that that laptop's out there. Anyways, Bob Bullis, who owns a trucking company, said his convoy departed Scranton on Tuesday in an effort to grab attention of lawmakers behind COVID-19 mandates and restrictions, not the vaccine itself, but mandates and restrictions. On Wednesday evening, he told Fox News he was 30 miles from the Capitol and bumper-to-bumper traffic. He earlier promised to cause gridlock, disruptions in the Capitol Beltway, as well as delay. He earlier promised to cause See, there they go again. Cause. Just cause, not caused. Gridlock and disruptions on the Capitol Beltway, as well as delays. And DC prepares, and they're sending troops there for that too. So they got to send everybody to DC. Everybody's going to DC. Hey, we got a peaceful protest coming. Oh, well, you better send the National Guard and everybody and military and, whoever else. Oh, we've got the State of the Union coming up, and a lot of people don't like Biden for some reason. Oh, you got to send the military, put up the fences and everything. If it's that big of a problem, maybe the problem isn't the convoy. Maybe the problem isn't, the people that don't like this administration. Maybe the problem is the administration. I know half the country disagrees with that, but a whole nother half it's just, I have not seen this. I saw a lot of hate for Trump. I did. And a lot of that fueled by the media. Now, whether it was justified or not, I can't say, because everyone has their own take on different things, right? But what is really amazing here is the amount of hate toward this administration, especially given the fact that the mainstream media has been shilling for this dude and this administration the entire time. They are still talking about Trump. They are still talking about January 6th. They are blaming this current crisis in Russia and Ukraine for gas prices going up, even though they've been up since Biden's been in office. And he closed pipelines and stuff. Like, they are doing everything they can to cover for this guy and this administration. But yet he is still probably as hated, if not more hated than Trump. I know there's plenty of polls out there. I don't know which polls to believe. I mean, obviously, that's a question in and of itself, because we saw polls saying Hillary was going to win. We saw polls that Trump was going to win against Biden. So, it was a free and fair, legitimate election, I'm sure. But it's just amazing how you have everyone supporting this administration, but then yet so many people are seeing through the smoke and mirrors. I think Americans are waking up to find out what mainstream media is all about and whose pocket they're in. And if you're watching this, I hope you have too, because us independent content creators, we serve no masters. I mean, we serve to bring you the news, the information. I'm going to tell you right now, if that little subscribe button is red, hit it and subscribe to my channel. I got more shows coming out. Like the video, share the video, comment. And I say to do all that for a couple of reasons. One, don't want you to miss out on anything. Number two, it helps the YouTube algorithm so more people see it. And three, to be transparent, I'm not trying to get rich off of this. My goal is to be a filmmaker. I don't care about this. This is to bring a different perspective of the news and a more transparent telling of what's out there, without serving the, Pfizer gods or whoever that corporate media does. So my hopes is that this can get out to more people to hear the truth, or to hear, a different perspective, or however you want to look at it, versus the same old narrative that they're hearing from mainstream media. So if you want to like, share, comment, that's awesome. I'm not going to beg you to do it. If you want to do it, do it. Awesome. I appreciate it. If not, hey, leave a hateful comment. Tell me how terrible I am. Or if you think I'm bald up under this hat. Basically, I am. Spoiler alert. All right. So let's move on. So here's a story that's interesting, and it's interesting for a couple of reasons. One, it's against Joe Rogan, who is public enemy number one right now. I say that. I still think he's public enemy number one, but I just heard that Dave Chappelle just got signed on for more Netflix specials, so he's back up there again as a public enemy, because I know a lot of people are unhappy about that. But Joe Rogan's public enemy number one by the news media and Jim Psaki and whoever else. But the other reason that this is interesting to me is this website that I found it from is meaww.com. And they reference an article by The Sun, which we'll get to here in a minute too. And they're really about it, other than just finding it on random other sites. This is not a story that's been running widespread, and I think it's very interesting, very telling. So we'll go through it, and maybe you'll find it interesting too. Maybe you won't. That's fine. But I do think it's interesting to see how far things are getting for some folks. So it says Joe Rogan hires elite armed bodyguards for protection amid Spotify controversy. Might sound a little extreme, but we'll read into it and see what you think afterwards. Podcast Joe Rogan has now increased his security by hiring elite Marine SEALs amid the ongoing Spotify controversy. UFC commentator has hired an armed security team to protect him and his family. Rogan has been in the spotlight since his controversial remarks on COVID vaccination and posing as a frontier in the anti-vax campaign. I don't know if that's correctly worded there and accurate there. His podcasts were reportedly spreading anti-COVID agendas and fabricating the pandemic as a planned conspiracy, which had triggered many, including singers like Neil Young, who no one cares about. The exclusive report by The Sun revealed that an armed guard is stationed round the clock outside the Spotify podcaster's $14.4 million 8-bedroom home in Austin, Texas. The armed and dangerous guards are also said to be positioned inside the property, which is monitored by CCTV. It comes as Rogan's coverage of the COVID-19 pandemic and vaccines and his use of the N-word on the Joe Rogan Experience sparked a furious reaction from his critics. Rogan, along with his wife and 2 kids, have recently relocated to their Austin home, where he also records his podcast nearly 2 years ago after leaving California. The sources claim that Rogan loves his family more than anything, and that was the sole reason for hiring a protection team. Joe Rogan runs an exclusive podcast on Spotify and has signed a hefty deal worth between 100 million, 200 million, yada, yada, yada. We know that. He came under fire recently. We know all that. It's just more of the same. Here we go. Rogan was brutally trolled and attacked on social media for running such anti-vax agendas, and his podcast was condemned by celebrities like Neil Young, who removed his music from Spotify after issuing an ultimatum to the platform to choose between him and Rogan. The move by Young, 76, was followed by singer-songwriter Joni Mitchell, 78, and other artists. Later, a video emerged that showed Joe Rogan using the N-word numerous times during his podcast, which he apologized for, but also described as a political hit job. And it was a political hit job. It was, again, it was on Tim Pool. It was either him or one of the other folks on there said that there is a difference between saying a word and using a word. And I didn't really understand that until he went into a little bit more detail. But basically, he wasn't using the word to call somebody the N-word or to use it disparagingly in a conversation. He was saying the N-word as though he was quoting what someone else was saying, or quoting something from a song, or quoting something from a stand-up special. You know, this was not him. This was him saying the word without using it to be derogatory. I know that a lot of people aren't going to get that. And I didn't at first either. If you use the word, use the word to me. But at the same time, once I thought about it a little bit more and put it in that perspective, it made sense to me that there is a difference between that. Just like Papa John. He was saying in a conference call, from my understanding, for example, he was quoting something that somebody had said and the N word was involved. And he was just quoting that person or quoting that song or quoting that artist or quoting whatever. Well, of course, he lost everything because of that. He wasn't using it. He was saying it as an example, like, hey, this is a word that we can't use. This is something we can't tolerate. And because he used it in that context, he said that word, he lost everything. So there's a very, very fine line there. And I get that. But I think we go to the extremes. And he was, as Tim says, he was saying it, not using it. But anyways, we'll look over here at the sun to see if there's anything else in here. It's more or less the same. Obviously, any crazy could turn up and try anything. He's got supporters as well as enemies. It's fair to say. Having a security team there is preemptive just in case things are returned to the worst. People come from all over the country to visit his house. Pretty wild. He doesn't want anything to ever get out of hand. There are guys inside the house as well. He gets high profile people there too who also need protection because where he records a show, it's just better to be safe than sorry. There was, this whole thing was funny too. I don't know. I mean, everybody covered it, I think, at some point. I know the quartering did, but like you can see all the color that's here and the sharpness, the color and contrast and everything there. And then when they showed this video clip on CNN and some other networks, they literally pulled back the saturation and tinted it toward green a little bit and actually made his skin look more green and sickly and stuff as he was talking about how he got COVID. It's manipulation like you wouldn't believe it. In fact, on this show, 2 or 3 weeks ago, we showed the debate between Trump and Biden for president. And you can see the blue background between the two side by side, that there was something a little bit amiss. And it was on Trump's side, they had actually beefed up the saturation and warmed it up a little bit where the blue background did not match the blue background from Biden. And the reason for that is they made his skin look more orange, which is something they've always picked about and always made fun about. And there's plenty other times where they did that as well, where they amplified that to make it more comical and to make it just a subliminal thing they would do to attach that to them. So it's very, very subtle a lot of times, but they do that to manipulate you. Yes, they do. So you can go look all on that. And I don't see it on here, but I was wanting to find some examples. But there's already been threats, and I think it's terrible to see that. There've already been threats, like actual threats, like on the property and whatnot, that have come out there, thrown stuff, threatened lives or whatever. And so that's why, one of the reasons why he's really upped his security. So for some reason, people hate him that much that they're out there willing to hurt him, his family, whatever. And it just takes a really, really low quality person to do stuff like that. It reminds me of, again, not the biggest Trump supporter. I have to keep saying that. I dig a lot of the stuff he did. I dislike a lot of the stuff that he did too. Okay. So you got to kind of take a little bit of this and that with it. But the MAGA hats, right? I saw more people being violent toward people wearing the MAGA hats than people wearing the MAGA hats being violent. There's so many clips out there of people who are knocking the hats off of people's heads, threatening people because they're wearing it. I know, I can't remember, Officer Tatum and some others, black guys wearing them or going to, Republican rallies and whatnot, being called white supremacist and all kinds of stuff, even though they're black. And so it's just, there's a lot of hate that is coming from a particular side, it seems. And not that it doesn't come from both sides, it does. But right now, and over the last several years, good God, it has been super duper heavy on one side. And I'll just round out this entertainment segment here, I guess we'll call it, with a little bit of sad news. Since doing this podcast, I think we've lost Norm Macdonald, which I didn't even really cover because it really messed me up. But we lost Norm Macdonald, who is probably top 5 comedians for me. I see top comedians for me are Richard Pryor, Robin Williams, and Dave Chappelle. Not exactly sure which order I'd put them in. I think Robin Williams is still always going to be my favorite. But Richard Pryor and Dave Chappelle, But those guys are my top three. And I think Norm Macdonald and probably Mitch Hedberg are pretty neck and neck there for number 4, number 5. But one of the comedians I remember from years ago when I was younger, and I thought his way of telling jokes was just awesome, was the Amazing Jonathan. So I was saying, since we've been doing the podcast, we've lost Norm. That one really hurt. We lost Norm. We lost Bob Saget just recently. We just lost the Amazing Jonathan. I know I'm forgetting someone, and I feel awful for it because I was just thinking about it earlier. But we have we've been losing some of these comedians, and what sucks is that several of these comedians you either grew up watching or having some kind of ties to, or it's an industry that really is, and Joe Rogan's part of that industry. It's an industry that is the last bastion of kind of free speech. And of course now it's being attacked, and it's sad to see. But yeah, this one sucked too. The Amazing Jonathan, hate to see him go. I won't read the whole article here, but it was funny because he's a comedian, but he does like magic. But he's a comedian, so it's not really the greatest, most amazing magic you've ever seen. And there's twists and turns in it. I think they called him the Freddy Krueger of comedy, or the Freddy Krueger of magic. Is that in here somewhere? Because that was funny to me. Anyways, he was suffering with a heart condition for a while. And I want to say I saw somewhere that they've got a film coming out, kind of a documentary about him. So I'll be looking for that. I thought his take on comedy was unique and different. So I'm going to be checking that out. So I hate to end this segment on that low note, but if you've never seen The Amazing Jonathan, there's plenty of clips out there on YouTube and elsewhere. I highly recommend go checking them out. R.I.P. dude, you were great. All right, so we're going to move on to this next segment here when we're talking about gun makers getting sued. So Sandy Hook, a lot of people say it was a false flag, or I say a lot of people, a lot of conspiracy theorists will say it's a false flag. There's a lot of people who will obviously condemn them for that. I don't know if there's enough evidence to say it was a false flag or whatever. So I obviously can't be numb to the amount of loss and everything that happened there. And as a country, we mourned that these children were shot and killed, and just everything that happened there is just so super tragic. So of course, first, my heart goes out to these families and to these individuals that were affected by that. And it was a lot of people affected by that. But at the same time, in the same breath, I'll also say that suing a gun manufacturer for manufacturing a gun that was used illegally doesn't make any sense to me. And it shouldn't be allowed. But now it's kind of setting a precedence. So I understand the Sandy Hook families are hurt and they're looking for some support from somewhere, somebody to blame. For some reason, whenever somebody is a murderer, a rapist, I don't know, drug trafficker, sex trafficker, violent offender of any sort, we always blame the criminal unless they're associated with firing a gun, right? Especially if it's a mass shooting. I'll lean more toward that, I guess, because then it's no longer the criminal's fault, it's the gun's fault. And that's stupid. That's like a whole nother level of stupid. It is always the criminal's fault. The gun didn't do anything. It was the criminal that used the gun. And I'm gonna get on to everybody who does this. And this is, folks on the right too. And I say folks on the right because those are the ones that tend to be more Second Amendment, pro Second Amendment. And there's plenty of Democrats that are pro Second Amendment. Don't get me wrong. But, these are the, good old boys that are pro Second Amendment. You better not take our guns from us and stuff. And they will drop this line, and I cannot stand it. And maybe this was beaten into me when I was in Boy Scouts by our Scoutmaster, because the term weapon is used incorrectly so often when we talk about, hey, people should be able to have their guns and have a weapon. It's a firearm. It's a firearm. It's a gun. It's a rifle. It's a firearm. It's not a weapon unless it's used as a weapon. There are plenty of axes and shovels and knives out there that have been used as weapons more than a firearm. So I hate hearing, even when people are standing up for the Second Amendment and gun rights and stuff like that. And I think they've just been conditioned this way, maybe. But when they refer to guns as weapons, it just boils me over, because they are not weapons unless they're used as weapons. Unless you actually fire that gun at someone or something to destroy it, to hurt it, to kill it, to whatever, to use it in an aggressive manner, it's not a weapon. If it's self-defense, it's a self-defense firearm. If it's target shooting, if it's hunting, it's just a firearm. It's not a weapon. So I can't stand that. So I want to start off with that. But as we get going here again, I don't want to seem like I don't care about what happened at Sandy Hook and about these children, or any, mass shooting or anything like that, or any of the small shootings, the cumulative amount of shootings that happen. And I know we point to it all the time, but Chicago alone, my God, the amount of shootings that happen there. But I blame the criminals, the shooters. I don't blame the gun manufacturers. But you know what? For time's sake, I don't think I'll go through this whole article. But it's interesting that people want to be surrounded by people with guns, like this here. The president being surrounded by people with guns. When something's wrong, they're going to call police officers who are people with guns to show up. And what this does is going after the gun manufacturers or the ammo makers or whatever. It's really putting a dent in us having guns and the ability to have self-defense firearms, or just, like I say, target practice, whatever, hunting, yada, yada. But to me, I mean, my big thing is the self-defense part of it, and it's huge. And we'll get to that in a minute with Russia and Ukraine, about how important it is for your people to own the firearms. But yeah, they settled a $73 million settlement against, was it Remington? Because they said they tried to make let me see how they word it. Hold on. It was a specific thing. Maybe it was just up here. The families and a survivor of the shooting sued Remington in 2015, saying the company should have never sold such a dangerous weapon to the public. They said their focus was on preventing future mass shootings by forcing gun companies to be more responsible with their products and how they market them. And I don't remember if it's in this article or maybe it's in the next article, but it was how they were marketed is what they had the problem with. It says they were marketed basically as, as a military style rifle that could do all kinds of stuff and you can upgrade and stuff, which it is. And that is a way to market it. Why is that wrong? This guy got the gun illegally, used it illegally. Why? Here it is. But why are they the ones to blame? It says the civil court case in Connecticut focused on how the firearm used by the Newtown shooter, a Bushmaster XM15 E2S rifle, was marketed, alleging it targeted younger at-risk males, and advertising and product placement in violent video games. In one of Remington's ads, it features the rifle against a plain backdrop and the phrase, "Consider your man card reissued." The whole idea that this is for younger at-risk males doesn't make any sense to me at all. Maybe it's in here that goes a little bit more into it. But this is from Fine Law. It says, will we see more lawsuits against gun manufacturers following Sandy Hook settlement? The Sandy Hook lawsuit. Specifically, they contended that Remington knew its Bushman, yada, 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 is a military-style assault rifle with virtually no reason for civilian use. They also claim that Remington marketed the assaultive qualities of the firearm to consumers, knowing full well that when used as designed, the weapon was capable of inflicting massive injury and death. Rather than go to trial, when chose to settle the case, yada yada yada. The thing is that they keep slapping on, and I say they, people that don't understand guns, keep slapping on terms like fully semi-automatic. There's no such thing. It's either fully automatic, semi-automatic, or whatever the single action is, if it's a bolt action or whatever. Semi-automatic just means you pull the trigger once, bullet shoots out, pow. The gun spits out that empty cartridge, loads the next cartridge in there, and you're ready to go. The next round's ready to go. Pull the trigger and it goes again. Fully automatic is when you hold the trigger down and just keeps going. What they try to do without directly lying to you is they will say that these guns are fully semi-automatic. Well, yeah, I'm fully man. I am man and I am fully man are the same thing. You know what I mean? Adding the word fully onto something doesn't change, its definition. It is semi-automatic, and yes, it is fully semi-automatic, but it's not full automatic. They will use that. They will say, like I said earlier, weapon. I can't stand that. They will say weapon when they talk about firearms. And they say assault rifles. Assault rifle has the same connotation as weapon does. AR does not stand for assault rifle. It's armatoid, I don't remember, light or whatever. But it's the style, the fashion of which it's made after to look a certain way. It's just like cars. You have some cars that look like they go really fast, even though they don't. Right? You got some cars that don't look like they go fast, that go really fast. And with guns, it's the same way. You can get a rifle or a shotgun that has the wood, stock and looks just plain and normal that can do significantly more damage than an AR-15 or this, Bushman, whatever, military style assault rifle. But they look scary. So all of a sudden, those are the worst things ever. People don't know what they're doing. And I'll keep pointing out to, I always like, pointing to other sources too, but I don't know if it's considered louder with Crowder, but I know Steven Crowder did a thing where he took several different firearms and laid them out on a table and had people come by and vote on which one they needed to outlaw and which ones were the worst. And they always picked the scary looking black guns. Maybe there's some racism behind that. I don't know, but they always picked the scary looking black guns. They never really picked out the handguns or the wood stocked guns, which a lot of them were of a higher capacity, of either the magazines they could hold or a higher caliber round, or just in general more lethal in one way or the other if used in such a fashion. So people don't know what they don't know, and we keep letting the media and politicians and whoever just continue to manipulate the way we understand things and the way we do things. I know I didn't talk about this article that much and this whole thing, but it just disgusts me to see it. As much, like I said, heart goes out to you for losing your children and everything, but it is not the gun manufacturer's fault. Just like it's not, it's not my fork manufacturer's fault that I got fat. It's my fault. And I know that's being silly, and this isn't a silly topic necessarily, but I mean, we've just gotten ridiculous. To me, it's just gotten ridiculous. Maybe you feel otherwise. And what you have to remember too in times like this is you can't let your sympathy and your feelings override facts and truth. And that's what happens a lot of times. We want to be sympathetic. I want to be sympathetic to these people. I want to understand, they went through, hell, losing family members, maybe multiple family members, and the chaos that it caused, even the kids that weren't injured, weren't shot or anything, but just the nightmarish hell they went through that day at school. They're going to live with that forever. And that breaks my heart. But at the same time, we shouldn't be making ourselves feel better by attacking or clinging on to someone else to lay the fault on. There's one person at fault there, and that is the shooter. Now you can go beyond that and say, okay, now where did the shooter get the gun? Well, if the parents gave him the gun, then the parents are at fault too. Now, if he went and bought the gun and the gun shop did not do the background checks they were supposed to do, the gun shop can be at fault, right? Or someone else bought the gun and gave it to him, whatever. You can find all kinds of people that are at fault. But the people that just put the pieces together, put up an advertisement to sell an item, and someone bought it and it was used maliciously, it's not their fault. It's out of their hands. It is out of their hands. And you have to remove the emotions. I'm sorry. And I hate to be negative and I hate to be like this. You guys have lost your minds. It's not their fault. And all you're going to do is make it harder for the rest of us to eventually buy more firearms to protect our families with. All right, before I get into these next articles here, we're going to talk about Russia, Ukraine, and more here. And before I get into the articles and before I really get into the stories that I'm going to talk about, I want you to understand something. I started pulling these stories up earlier in the week. I had to refresh and pull up some more stories as it got closer to today, and guaranteed that everything that I say now will probably be changed within the matter of 24, 48 hours because things have started progressing already so quickly. And I do a weekly show. I do not do a daily show. You know, I do not do an hourly show. The quartering, God bless him, the dude cranks out so many different shows throughout the day. And this is something that he, like he said, he's not really thrilled to cover, but he's been staying on it pretty good. And every time there's been a major update, he's been out there with it. And I really, really appreciate the work ethic and the commitment behind something like that. So, you know, Jeremy with the quartering, dude, I love you, man. You're doing an awesome, awesome job. But before I get into this, let's watch this video as just a reminder. We've had it here on the show before, but just want to remind you about what we've heard from our commander-in-chief before.
And so I think what you're going to see is that Russia will be held accountable if it invades. And it depends on what it does. It's one thing if it's a minor incursion and then we end up having a fight about what to do and not do, et cetera.
Say what?
The cost of going into Ukraine in terms of physical loss of life for the Russians, they'll be able to prevail over time. They'll be able to prevail over time. They'll be able to prevail over time. But it's going to be heavy. It's going to be real. It's going to be consequential.
All right, so two things from that one. And again, we've already talked about this in another video, so I won't dive into it too much. We'll get into some articles here in a minute. But he said, you know, they're going to pay unless it's a minor incursion. But what is that? He opened the door and kind of left it open saying, there might be some leeway here. And then he said they're going to prevail over time. He knows Russia will prevail in taking over Ukraine. Now, this was said well before this month when he said this. And it's interesting to see where we're at right now with everything unfolding like it is, and to see what we're doing, how little or how much we're doing, depending on when you watch this and what has progressed since then. But those were his words, right? He kind of, to me, it's almost like he gave Putin the green flag, say, hey, you know, we'll work with you, no big deal. Others may see it differently. That's kind of my interpretation of it. Let's dive into a few articles here. So an AP, it says Congress backs Biden on Russia sanctions, clamors for more. This was, I always hate why they hide stuff. I want to know when this was written. Anyways, with rare but fragile alignment, the U.S. Congress is largely backing President Joe Biden's decision to confront Russia with potentially escalating sanctions for the crisis in Ukraine, as lawmakers brace for perhaps the most daunting foreign policy crisis the nation has faced in a generation. But the next steps are highly volatile, even more so after Russian President Vladimir Putin announced early Thursday a military operation in Ukraine, and explosions were heard in Kiev, Kharkiv, Odessa, and other cities there. We must refuse to stand by and watch innocent Ukrainian men, women, and children suffer, the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Senator Bob Menendez, said in a statement after Putin's forces moved against Ukraine. He said he was committed to ensuring that the United States upholds our responsibility to exact maximum cost on Putin, the Russian economy, and those who enabled and facilitated this trampling of Ukraine's sovereignty. With isolationist impulses rising at home, Congress has no appetite for war. Yet Americans also appear ambivalent about the U.S. working to keep the peace. New polling from the Associated Press and NORC, taken before Putin's announcement, says just 26% of Americans want the U.S. to play a major role in the Russian-Ukraine conflict. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said Wednesday that Russia's aggression toward Ukraine is an attack on democracy, found that the U.S. will stand united with its allies around the world in swiftly imposing sanctions on Russia and ensuring financial and political support for an independent Ukraine. Pelosi, who returned to the Capitol from a diplomatic overseas trip, situated the aggression from Russia toward Ukraine alongside intervention in the United States' own democratic process during the 2016 election. There will be a price to pay for Vladimir Putin, she said, flanked by lawmakers who had joined her delegation at the annual security conference in Munich. While Republican critics of the Biden administration and even some Democrats want the White House to go even tougher and swifter and more severe sanctions on Russia, most have given varying degrees of support for the White House strategy, including Biden's moves Wednesday to sanction the company building the Russia to Germany Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline. So we're going to talk about that in a minute too. So they are all about some sanctions. Here's an article from January. Senate Democrats back Biden reject Cruz Nord Stream sanctions bill. So he had already come out with this idea to, well, I'll just read it real quick. The Senate on Thursday rejected, thank you for posting when the article was, January 13th. The Senate on Thursday rejected a Republican effort to impose sanctions related to a Russian-German natural gas pipeline during a pivotal period for the future of Ukraine and broader questions about transatlantic responses to the new Kremlin aggression. Senators voted 55 to 44 against legislation from Senator Ted Cruz that would require the imposition within 2 weeks of enactment of sanctions in the front of asset freezes and travel bans on European business officials, leading the finalization of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. The bill needed 60 votes to pass. So they were against them then, they're for them now. This is what I was talking about earlier, how they want to flip the tides, and you're going to remember the good stuff, and how for whatever reason they are just opposed to doing anything that seems right until the last minute. But I wanted to point that out, that this dude right here, and I'm definitely not offending. I've started liking him a little bit more, and then I pull back a little bit too. But he gets under my skin. I think it's just the way he talks, or he's so, I don't know. But he does get under my skin. But the dude's very, very intelligent, and he makes some really good points here. And he had a bill out there to go after Nord Stream sanctions, and they said no. So they did put out some other sanctions. We'll talk about all that in just a minute. Before we do, let's talk about the Budapest Memorandum. And I'm not talking about Black Widow and Hawkeye in Budapest or whatever. And Washington Post was a Budapest Memorandum mean for the U.S. on Ukraine. As the world gird for the potential Russian invasion of Ukraine, which we are seeing now, it's possible you will hear quite a bit in the coming days and weeks about the Budapest Memorandum. After the dissolution of the Soviet Union, Ukraine was suddenly left with the world's third largest nuclear arsenal. So the United States and Russia reached an agreement in 1994 known as the Budapest Memorandum on Security Assurances, by which Ukraine would turn over its nukes in exchange for those security assurances. The agreement is being cited in light of Russia transparently threatening to violate it again, after it already violated it with its annexation of Crimea in 2014. Talk about that in a minute. But also when it comes to the United States' duty to defend Ukraine from the same aggregation. But unlike Article 5 of the NATO Charter, it does not require a specific response from the United States or others, so it's worth a little history lesson. The memorandum has been invoked recently in response to some on the right, including Fox News host Tucker Carlson and some congressional Republicans arguing that the United States effectively has no business taking sides between Ukraine and Russia. One popular Twitter thread responding to Carlson said the Budapest Memorandum amounted to the United States having agreed to serve as the guarantors of Ukrainian security. A bipartisan group of members of Congress last week wrote an op-ed stating that the memorandum assured that the United States would come to the aid of Ukraine in the event it was preyed upon. The reality is much murkier. The agreement is not an official treaty. It is neither legally binding nor does it carry an enforcement mechanism. And while it provides security assurances, they do not include specific promises with regard to potential invasion. And I would read more of this right here. Actually, I will read just to this point down here. The brief memorandum contained 5 points that signatories, which also include the United Kingdom, said they would reaffirm, including none of their weapons will ever be used against Ukraine except in self-defense or otherwise in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations, to refrain from economic coercion in accordance with other agreements, and perhaps most pertinent with regard to a potential U.S. response today, to seek immediate United Nations Security Council action to provide assistance to Ukraine if Ukraine should become a victim of an act of aggression or an object of a threat of aggression in which nuclear weapons are used. Now, I have heard that Russia has threatened nuclear weapons, but it hasn't happened yet, so maybe that hasn't triggered this one. But what it looks like here is basically it was a handshake. Hey, you give us your nukes and we'll look out for you guys. Promise, deal. Well, if we're not holding up our deals, no one's going to want to make deals with us. Our allies are going to have a hard time with us. Look at what we did with Afghanistan. We turned it over to the Taliban and we left, hundreds of Americans behind and other folks behind that were wanting to leave. It was a disaster. Okay. And I've got a whole spiel I'll go through in a minute with this, but it's really, really sad. I mean, part of me doesn't want us to get involved either because Ukraine is not a perfect democracy or anything itself. It's got issues, and I hate to get in the middle of them and Russia, but at the same time, with Russia wanting to be this superpower again and just be aggressive like they are, you can't just let them keep sliding. Sometimes you gotta pull up, let them know what's up. And I hate that because I know lives are going to be lost. American lives are going to be lost. And not that I'm only thinking of American lives, but of course, as an American, I hate to think that when it's not even our conflict, but it is a world conflict and it has a lot of potentials to be even larger than that. In fact, I'll go through a little bit more here. From Yahoo Finances, U.S. officials warn businesses of possible cyber attacks following sanctions on Russia. Let's see. Yahoo Finance's Dan Howley details the U.S. intelligence reports outlining potential targets for Russian cyber attacks as retaliation for sanctions imposed. Let's switch gears now. A big question out of the Russian-Ukraine conflict is a concern over cyber attacks. Ukraine saying government websites have come under DDoS attacks. That announcement coming this morning. Apparently, banks in the country have been targeted as well. But now there could be U.S. implications as well. And for more on that, let's bring in Yahoo Finance's Dan Howley. Dan, we're hearing from some U.S. officials that businesses need to be careful about ransomware attacks after Biden announced those Russia sanctions yesterday. What are the details on that? Dan says that's right. We're seeing a lot of kind of chatter about how the U.S. was preparing for potential cyber attacks. We actually saw in New York State the governor and mayor of New York City gathering for their unveiling of a new cyber kind of command center, where they would protect the city and state and various municipalities against cyber attacks, and especially coming at this point in time. And it goes on and on about cyber attacks. Do you remember when we were attacked by a Russian affiliated, Russian backed, whatever, cyber attack that went after the oil pipeline that threw things off for a while? Well, I do. And after that, Biden did a press conference, and this is something that he said.
Another area we spent a great deal of time on was cyber and cybersecurity. I talked about the proposition that certain critical infrastructure should be off limits to attack, period, by cyber or any other means. I gave them a list. If I'm not mistaken, I don't have it in front of me, 16 specific entities, 16 defined as critical infrastructure under U.S. policy.
Hey, sorry about that, guys. I'm gonna try my best here to overdub, and you got my little corner up there blurred out, so I don't look like this is a Godzilla movie or something like that. You're trying to read my lips. Um, Again, I'm gonna try to do the best I can here with kind of talk about what I did, but basically, we just heard how he was talking about the cybersecurity, and there's certain areas that he couldn't. There were 16 specific areas that he couldn't attack. They were red lines. And so he said, don't cross these red lines. But he kind of left the door open for some other things. And here in this Yahoo News article, it talks about Russia threatening to target his sensitive U.S. assets as part of a strong and painful response to the sanctions. Again, guys, anything that I miss is going to be is still in the articles, and the links are all going to be in the description, so you can check those out as well. But this just talks about how the sanctions were the first round, and that Russia is going to be fighting back, and that nothing's going to be getting in their way. And it says Russia has proved that despite all the sanctions cost, it is able to minimize the damage, the ministry said in the statement. And even more so, sanctions pressure is not able to affect our determination to firmly defend our interests. So, what are our interests? What is it that they're shooting for? That's a very, very telling, interesting kind of thing to see what Russia's ultimate goal here is. But, yeah. And then we're jumping back over here to Senator Ted Cruz. He put out the sanctions, or tried to put out the sanctions against Nord Stream 2. And then they were like, no. And then they're like, yes. And it's just funny how they keep changing their mind on everything. But here we are. In AP News, it says China says U.S. creating fear and panic over Ukraine, which is really interesting because, how trustworthy the Chinese are, right? We read earlier about, Trump, being anti-Chinese or whatever. There may be something to it. So let's look at this article real quick. It says China on Wednesday accused U.S. Of creating fear and panic over the crisis in Ukraine and called for talks to reduce rapidly building tensions. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Yang Chang said China is opposed to new unilateral sanctions imposed to Russia, reiterating a long-standing Chinese position. She said the U.S. was fueling tensions by providing defensive weapons to Ukraine without mentioning Russia's deployment of as many as 190,000 troops on the Ukrainian border. Hua also did not mention efforts by the U.S., France, and others to engage Russia diplomatically. China-Russia ties have grown closer under Chinese leader Xi Jinping, who hosted Russian President Vladimir Putin and talks in Beijing earlier this month. The two sides issued a joint statement backing Moscow's opposition to a NATO expansion in former Soviet republics and busting China's claim to self-governing island of Taiwan. Interesting. Let's listen to China. Right here is another story. This is an oldie but a goodie. This was Eric Swalwell and the Spy, a lesson in how China is undermining us. And I'll probably clip a little bit here because there wasn't a whole lot of filler I was looking for. I was just wanting to point out here about how the Chinese were infiltrating our political system. And Eric Swalwell was hooking up with a Chinese hooker, basically. And I don't know if he ever got any or not. I think people made jokes about that. But essentially, the dude's hooking up with a Chinese prostitute who was a spy. And I think she had been in and out of several cabinets, so to speak. But Swalwell's one that grabbed the attention. And, of course, the FBI pointed that out to them, to his office. It says FBI officials in 2015 chose to give Rep Swalwell a defensive briefing, meaning that they let him know the specific indicators that a suspected Chinese intelligence operative was actively targeting his office. For perspective, the FBI gives many such briefings every year to elected and career officials across the government. Since the Bureau is charged with monitoring China's operations in this country, the FBI's decision to brief Swalwell's proper course of action. Of course it was. And yes, as has been endlessly pointed out, the FBI, in a startling double standard, did not provide the then candidate Donald Trump with the same courtesy in 2016, even though it possessed even thinner indications of cooperation with a hostile intelligence operation. So, yeah, that's basically just him hooking up with a Chinese hooker and her getting into our democratically elected officials and into our government. Another story is with Dianne Feinstein, another Democrat, and she had a Chinese spy working for her. Not actually going to go into reading the story all in all, but basically these are just examples of where the Chinese were unreliable. You know, we couldn't take their word, not to mention the whole COVID-19 thing, but here they are undermining our democracy, infiltrating different areas of our democracy. And lastly, here we see that Taiwan turns back Chinese fighter jets on the same day Putin invades Ukraine. It's almost like China can't be trusted. So yeah, look, China and Russia have each other's back, no doubt. And I think with our military spread, if we do get involved and have our spread between Ukraine and then something happening in Taiwan, I think we're really going to be set up for disaster here. So, you know, I don't want to be the one to talk about World War III ever at any point in time. I hope we never see it. But there's a lot of other countries involved, a lot of other countries at stake. Sovereignty of people at stake, and it's just messy, it's sloppy, it's really concerning. But this is not the first threat against Taiwan, but they have actively said that they're going to watch and see what happens. I mean, we did not do great in Afghanistan. We pull out of Afghanistan terribly, leaving hundreds of our people there, and plenty of other people that wanted to get out, and then we just hand the country over to the Taliban, giving them all of our, you know, weapons that we left there and everything. It was a huge mess. And of course, you know, that's, I forget who it was. They said that Biden, out of all his years in Congress, that was like his worst thing was foreign diplomacy and whatnot. And here we see it in action again. I'm really, really concerned about where we're heading with all this between the Chinese superpower, the Russian superpower, and knowing what happened last time. Just we are setting ourselves up for disaster here. We can't get control over it, and it's going to take obviously more than just the U.S. So, you know, it's time some people step up and we go ahead and stop this before it gets started. Again, I'm gonna go ahead and cut this a little bit because I think the only thing that I talked about was a post I made on social media, and I'll read that real quick just because it kind of highlights some of the stuff that we've already talked about, and I thought it was cute, so pull that up real quick. All right, I said Ukraine gave up their nukes under Clinton after an agreement that the US and UK would stand with them if attacked. Russia took over Crimea under Obama with barely anything said. Biden threatened to withhold $1 billion from the Ukraine government while VP if they didn't fire an attorney that was looking into corruption in a company that Hunter Biden was working for. So far, no one was sounding any alarms. Then Trump gets elected. The establishment freaks out and claims Russia interference. Hunter Biden's laptop turns up and stories of him sitting on boards for companies in Ukraine and then China turn up, but the media is silent about those stories. Trump finds out about the quid pro quo from Biden and reaches out to the Ukraine leader to look into something to see if something's out of sorts, and then Trump gets impeached for that phone call. Biden gets elected president, more votes than any other president under the most secure and legit election ever, of course. On day one in office, Biden halts new oil and gas drilling. Russia-based hacker group cyber attacks Colonial Pipeline, shutting it down until a $5 million ransom is paid. Biden openly states that he told Putin that there were certain areas that were off limits for cyber attacks. He gave him a list of 16 specific areas. We talked about that. The Biden admin waived sanctions that the Trump admin put in place on the Nord Stream 2 pipeline that could provide billions in revenue for Moscow and Putin allies. The Biden admin pulls out of Afghan, leaving Americans behind and turning the country over to the Taliban. Senate Democrats reject Ted Cruz's Nord Stream sanctions bill back in January. Biden openly states that Russia will pay if they invade Ukraine, but it depends on what it does. It's one thing if it's a minor incursion. It's a minor incursion. Russia attacks Ukraine and Biden makes sanction threats. The media is already suggesting higher gas prices are coming because we rely so much on oil from the Middle East, although also slipping in that prices are already at a record high now, saying that in that same article, they said the prices are going to rise because of that. They also admit the prices are already high, but they don't really say why, even though they are at a record high now because Biden. And then, of course, China's also begun some moves around Taiwan. But at least there are no more mean tweets. So that kind of wraps up my post on that. And, I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of hate for that. I saw somebody saying, there's tragedy and chaos happening all over the world, and we're bringing up who's the better president and everything now. Yeah, because y'all talked so much crap about Trump for 4 or 5 years, and just how awful he was and how great Obama was, and just dogged him and dogged him and dogged him. And so now when we can point to evidence saying, look, y'all picked the wrong guy, and we tried to tell y'all ahead of time, but y'all just hated this other dude so much that you would go to any lengths to get him out of office and get this moron in there, this weakling in there. And that's exactly what he is. I mean, he's been sucking off the government teat forever. He's hardly, if ever, had an actual job, an actual employment. And so, to have him up there making the calls is really scary. But anyways, guys, I appreciate y'all sticking with me if you have this far. I think that's pretty much it. Like I said, my short film is going to be at the Blue Ridge Film Festival this weekend, and I will be up there attending that. And if you guys are interested in watching it, I think it's $4.99. It'll be online through their website, and I'll make sure the link for that is below. Hey, look, if you like what we're doing here, make sure you like, you share, you subscribe, you comment. If you don't like, definitely comment. Let me know, because I love to hear all the negative comments. And I usually try to interact if I have time to with you all, and I do welcome it. I'm not hating on nobody, even if you are hating on me. It's all good as long as we can have some dialogue. I'm all about it. And then, like I say, I'm not, I want to be a filmmaker. That's where I want to make my living. That's the goal. That's the dream. So, I'm not trying to get rich or anything here on YouTube. So by asking you to do these things, it's not for my glory, but it's definitely to get a different perspective and get this independent content out there so that more of this is getting shared and getting in front of people versus, what mainstream media is pushing with their corporate backed influencers and whatnot. So guys, again, thanks for sticking around. Appreciate y'all, and we'll see y'all next week.
Watch this. Here's the real trick. It's an illusion. Unless I can't fix it. Then it's a reality. But I'm going to fix it by placing the pieces in his hand, sprinkling what we call magic dust over the ripped pieces. All right? Tapping it twice with the wand. Excuse me. Okay.